if you guys could just introduce yourselves, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I am Elja. I work at the VPRO Gids. It's a magazine for the organization that actually we all work for.
Okay.
And I was asked by the publisher to put together this Hangout. So I invited the other people along. And I will be writing an article on our talk in the magazine later on.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
My name is Gabrielle Provaas. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll go.
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is Gabrielle Provaas. I'm a documentary filmmaker and a television program maker. I was actually considering doing a series on technology for VPRO, but in the meantime I did a big documentary, so I have to get going with the series again.
Okay.
So I'm very happy to talk to you, because I wanted to talk to you for another program, and I read your book and I love it.
Well, thank you.
Okay, my name is Gertjan.
Okay.
My name is Gertjan Kuiper. I work as project manager at the digital department of the VPRO. And I'm, well, sort of on and off working since the 80s on in the area of media and technology.
Okay. So, if you guys have read the book or are familiar with the book, I don't have to summarize it, and we can just go to questions, which would be fun. So, in some of the other Hangouts, people have not had a chance to read the book, so I had to kind of summarize it for a little bit. But it sounds like you guys are more familiar with the work, so what kind of questions do you have?
Yeah, I can start maybe, and we can just make a round.
Yeah.
Actually, the first question I have is a bit of a broader question. I wanted to know if all of your experience in the technology world and also in the real world, because you've done a lot of traveling, and is this book does it sum up everything you've learned in your life so far?
No, it hasn't. But I did feel that it was a big step for me in terms of trying to tackle a big question. And what's interesting is not that this book was a way for me to say what I know, because in fact the book was based on a genuine question, because I didn't know. I didn't know how I felt about technology. And this book was a way for me to try to answer that question. And the answer surprised me. I arrived at a place that I did not expect to when I began. So it wasn't as if I had this idea and then I wrote the book to kind of disseminate the idea. It was I had a question, which is what should our relationship be? Where should we put technology in the cosmos? And this book was my investigation of coming to an answer that was new to me. And so now that I'm here, I have further questions, and I want to kind of ask the next series of investigations to try to answer that. So I'm not kind of like having a kind of a little crystal ball of really fantastic answers and kind of dispensing them. It's more the other way around of me really trying to use a book as a means of thinking, of asking these questions, which is how this last book was made, and that's why it took so long to do, because I thought that what I'd be able to do is go around and ask all the really smart philosophers of science, experts, and get the theory of technology and write it down and translate it into nice English, which is sort of what journalists do. But after 5 years of asking everybody, nobody had the theory, so that meant that I had to kind of work on something and answer it myself.
Mm-hmm. Is the book in fact written on your weblog?
I did write out a lot of it on the blog, where I was thinking out loud, and so not all of it, but a large portion of that was published on the blog, and I would take responses and answer them, and I would revise it as I went along and change my mind. And so that writing out loud was an essential part of this book. Was sort of composing it out loud so that I could test these ideas on people even as I was writing them.
I love the fact that you yourself are very keeping technology at arm's length, as you write.
Trying to.
Yeah, and that's why I love the chapter about the Amish, and I love the notion that every technology ever invented will never disappear. I mean, the basics of it. But then I thought, after reading it, like, okay, you have this position of keeping yourself away from it, and having this overview, and actually urging the reader to have the same attitude towards it. But yet, for a new technology to be completely implemented, it has to be washed, over the world. It has to, you call it, it has to become ubiquitous. So I cannot rhyme the two in a way.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that technologies want to become ubiquitous, but very few of them do. I mean, there is the drive, just like I would say any living species, like a dandelion or anything, has built into it a urgency to try and replicate everywhere. Very few of them succeed in doing that. But that is the urge, that's the pressure. It's kind of like water pressure in a tank. It wants to flow out, although very few tanks will flow out. But if it gives a little hole, if you give it a chance, it will. And so the same thing with the replications is replication wants to be ubiquitous, although there are so many factors that prevent it from ever becoming ubiquitous. So that's what I'm trying to say. I actually think there's going to be fewer and fewer technologies that will become globally ubiquitous, as say the cell phone has become, or woven cotton clothing. There are a few technologies that will become ubiquitous around the world, but most of them, in fact, I think on a statistical basis, most technologies will not become very common. That's the whole point of this kind of personal fabrication and other stuff that we're doing, is that we'll make lots of these little things that will be able to target to a very small group that will be worth doing, because you'll be able to find the 10,000 or 100,000 people in the world who really, really, really want it. And you don't have to have a mass success in order to have a success. You'll be able to make these niche technologies. And I think as a total proportion of all technologies that are invented, fewer of them will actually ever reach global ubiquity, even though there is built within them this pressure to become ubiquitous. In other words, they'll become as ubiquitous as we let them, so to speak.
Yeah, okay, but for the internet, for instance, it's very important that it becomes ubiquitous.
Yes.
Because otherwise it's not the same as it is.
Right. So what we see in those kinds of technologies as network effects is that a lot of that ubiquity is only temporary. There's a winner-take-all. In other words, whenever you have a network effects or communications technologies, there is a huge advantage to have a single network. And so everything comes together as a single network, but that doesn't last very long. There's a temporary monopoly, let me put it that way. So actually monopolies are actually very advantageous to these worlds. And they would be horrible otherwise from the consumer point of view, because consumers don't do well in monopolies, except in this case, with the communication technologies, they're hugely beneficial, and they're generally very temporary. They don't last very long. So you have a monopoly like a Microsoft. Who's talking about the threatening monopoly of Microsoft now? Google right now is being talked about as monopoly.
Facebook.
Facebook. In 10 years, nobody will be talking about that. And oftentimes these kind of bureaucratic, trust-busting, monopoly-busting things come in just at the moment when they're just about ready to be irrelevant. That happened with IBM. That happened with Microsoft. It'll happen with Google. There'll be all kinds of stuff stirring, and just at the moment when it's reached its peak and it's no longer going to be as relevant, they'll have some kind of legal action. But these monopolies, while they're in effect, are very, very effective, and we want them. We want to have them because they enable this protocol, this ease of communication. So we have right now there's a monopoly in language. There's the alphabet. Okay, the alphabet is a monopoly. Everybody uses it. If somebody had invented the alphabet, they'd be very, very rich, because everybody has to use those same letters and you don't want to use anyone else, and there's a huge advantage to using the same thing. And so in this kind of network world, those kinds of monopolies and universal ubiquity are hugely advantageous, but they are very ephemeral.
Thank you.
Just to welcome our other member of the conversation.
Yes.
Can you maybe introduce yourself, Bouwer?
Yeah, I'm Bouwer van Straat. I'm sorry I was late. It was a technological problem, but I'm a science journalist with the VPRO as well. I'm mainly writing about social and psychological sciences and technology as well.
Okay,
so
welcome
everybody. Hello.
Thank you. So we're just taking questions. I'm not summarizing the book, assuming that people are somewhat familiar with the basic claims of the book. And so tell me what's on your mind. What do you see out there that either fits into the theory of the book or that contradicts it?
Well, actually, if I can start, I have a question about the book. You are trying to look at the world through the perspective of technology, as if it's an autonomous agent.
Yes.
And at the end, you seem to conclude that indeed it is an autonomous agent. But I was wondering, is it sort of like a thought experiment, or do you really believe it is an autonomous agent?
Well, I came to really believe the perspective, but I don't believe that it is wholly autonomous. So I think autonomy we tend to use in a kind of a binary sense, that it's either non-autonomous or autonomous. But I think autonomy, like most interesting things in the world, is really a continuum, including life and consciousness. So I think the technium is accumulating more and more autonomy. Now, it's not wholly autonomous, but of course neither are we. We're not wholly autonomous either, even though we think we are. So, yes, I truly, truly believe that the technium is acquiring autonomy, that there's a system-wide urgency, leaning, general tendencies, not conscious, but there is a bias in the technium towards certain things, and if we were to do the grand thought experiment of rewinding it and setting it back to the initial conditions and letting it run out again and again and again, that we would find very similar things, and we're on that progression right now. Yes, I do believe that.
So, and you call yourself a possibilian. You want to increase your options. And
true.
As you say it, the technium also wants to increase its options.
Yes.
So isn't there a tension?
No, they're the same possibilities.
They're the same. So, but are you increasing your options, or is it the technium giving us more options? What do you think?
Well, it's the same, because our humanity is our invention. Humans have invented humanity. Okay, we are self-created. When you're self-created, it puts you in a very precarious position, because you are both the creator and the created. You're both the master and the slave. So we are part of it. We humans are part of the technium. It's not like the technium is outside of us. Okay. So we in our own initiatives are part of this same growing autonomy of the technium. And so this is why it's very hard to unravel. It's sort of like trying to unravel nurture and nature. It's just due to your genes or your environment. They are one system. You cannot really unravel to these prime causes. Causality, when you're self-created, causality is a very curious thing. What's the cause? Is it your self-caused? And so this issue of trying to unravel the extent of the autonomy of the stuff that we've made with our minds versus our own autonomy, they are now melding into a single large system.
Okay, so if you increase your options, you're increasing the options
Yes.
of the technium.
Exactly, and vice versa.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, I've one that comes back to a little bit to what Gabrielle was asking. The tension between the technologies that you want to use and the ever-expanding technium. How do you personally choose which technologies you want to use and which you don't?
Well, of course, that was the origin of the book. What was my own uncomfort, my own ignorance about the lack of a framework for trying to answer that question. So I felt like, just like before Darwin, nature was, they had the naturalists going out collecting all these specimens and having their cabinets full of curious specimens, and biology was just sort of one specimen after another, because there was no theory. And I felt that I myself was in the same kind of boat, in the sense of, with technology, in the sense that technology was just sort of one invention after another. There was just tomorrow we would wake up and there would be another thing that we hadn't thought about, and I was just sort of collecting them one after another, and there was no sort of larger framework for understanding them and to try to help us to put them into some kind of frame, some kind of classification or some kind of theory. And so the book was attempted to answer that, and what I came out of this framework is that technologies that increase options and possibilities are the ones that I want to favor. And it's just, I should say it more carefully, it's the expressions of technologies that offer those possibilities are the ones that I want to favor. Okay, because we can make we can take any technology and we can weaponize it. Anything at all we can make into a weapon. And when you weaponize something, what you're using that technology for is to decrease choices and options in the world. You're cutting things down, you're killing it, you're destroying it. And if you can weaponize anything, then you can also kind of peacify or make it more convivial. And so I was interested in those technologies, those expressions of technologies, which increase choices and possibilities the most. And we could look, we could kind of, I began to kind of tease out what I thought some of those qualities were ones that were more open versus opaque, easier to understand versus hard to understand, those that were easy to participate in versus those that were closed, those that were flexible rather than rigid, those that were easy to leave versus those that were hard to leave. And I think anybody might make their own list of those kinds of qualities. And it's with those kinds of technologies that I wanted to, those versions of technologies that I wanted to embrace. Because the other thing that I concluded was that the progress or the arrival of technologies in the largest form were inevitable, and that we didn't really have any choice about those. Those were going to come. So when this kind of basic form of a new technology was coming, we didn't really have a chance. We didn't really have a choice about whether it was coming or not. We couldn't prohibit it. Our choice was in extracting out the most convivial expression of it, the friendliest, most possibilian version of it, and to move technologies that seem to be, the expressions that seem to be decreasing options and move them into a different role so that they increase options. So the perspective that I had was these technologies coming are inevitable, we can't stop them, but we can change the expression of them and move them around. We can't prohibit them, but we can certainly relocate them and have them do a job that is more convivial.
Yeah, can you give an example maybe of one of those technologies?
So there's lots of examples, but there's technologies that we have personal adoption of, and there's civic society-wide adoption. So in a society-wide adoption, DDT would be one. DDT is it's a chemical, synthetic chemical, and used in spraying on crops as a pesticide on millions of acres. Was a very large environmental disaster, causing all kinds of havoc and decreasing possibilities for all kinds of people and other organisms. We could, rather than trying to ban DDT, the molecule, we could take that same technology and relocate it, reimagine it, and we can use it to spray around households in the subtropics, and it's the most effective malaria eradicator that we know about saving hundreds of millions of lives a year, so increasing choices and possibilities. So it's the same technology in a different expression.
Yeah. And in your personal world?
In the personal world, I would say we could find something like, let's say this electronic, the thing that people worry about, Facebook or whatever it is. Obviously, social media itself will have many, many different forms. And so we can certainly imagine it being used for surveillance, in a way for tracking everything that we do. So we could imagine maybe, say, a regime in China where people actually were forced to use Facebook or to put everything through, to put their entire lives into kind of a social media that was sharing. That would be something that is going to decrease options and control and to restrict. So the way we use Facebook, we have a choice about the form of this social media, and so we may want to pick a form that doesn't, like right now, people are untracking or deleting their Google tracks. Okay, so that's a choice that we can make. We may not right now. I think this is very early on in terms of people trying to decide whether or not this is really going to have an effect or not. But one of the questions that I would ask is, okay, does tracking your choices over time, is that something that's going to increase possibilities over time? Is it open? Is it flexible? Is it sustainable? So those are the kinds of questions I would bring to it. Okay, is tracking these things on Facebook, does it lead to more communication between people? Is it something to easily get out of later on? Is it something that will tend to encourage openness? And if I can say yes to those things, then that would be the kind of form of the media that I would favor. So right now, just to complete this, right now I am in favor of the Google way of doing things, because I think that generally it is producing favorable options and opportunities for people. So I have decided to let Google track me.
Okay. All right. But on another level, you say if social media create more openness, it also makes people behave in a certain way that is that would be like a Marshall McLuhan metaphor, like the medium is the message. So it makes people behave the way the medium wants them to behave. So what's the danger you see in social media?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question, and I want to say very clearly, as I said in the book, is that I believe that every new technology will produce almost as many new problems as solutions.
True, yeah.
Okay, and I really do believe that. So I think we can easily list and talk about the very real problems that all these technologies have, including social media. And so the problems with social media are, as you just said, is that the medium, in a certain sense, the medium forms you, and it almost doesn't matter what you're saying on the medium. It's the fact that you're using it that will shape what your view and what you get out of it. And that's just one issue. And I think the other issue is that we were talking before about this kind of ubiquity. Well, there's a lot of problems with ubiquity and this kind of a communication system, which is that if you want to, well, there's several issues. One is if it goes down, if it breaks, it's broken. I mean, if you have one system and it breaks, if Facebook goes down for a long time, it's like, wow, that's
interesting.
You'll hurt. It'll be like being amputated. I mean, I have friends. They had a teenage daughter, and she was grounded. That means she was disciplined, and they disciplined her by taking away her cell phone. and she became physically ill. She
Oh,
was throwing up.
that's sad.
It was like an amputation. It was like it had been, just surgically removed from her, and she was so sick. So
Interesting, huh? And interesting to watch, no?
Is it good to experience such a thing as a teenager?
Well, it's sort of like, it depends on your philosophy. It's like going out into the woods and starving a little bit. Is that good? Well, it could be. It could be what you need, and it could be like, well, there might be other ways to do that. So
Depends on the teenager.
it depends on the teenager. Yes, as a lot of these things do. But in other words, it could have been done maybe less severely, or I don't know. Maybe the severity was necessary. But I think social media has lots of problems, and I suspect that a lot of the problems, most of the problems we have today were created by technologies we invented yesterday. Most of the problems we have tomorrow will be invented by technologies that we have made today. And so I think that social media is going to produce a whole lot of different illnesses in the future. Okay? And so, but the reason why I'm optimistic about it is because I think the benefits outweigh those illnesses, even if it's just by a few percent, even if it's by a little tiny bit, because I think a little tiny bit is all we need to have civilization. If we can create a few percent more than we destroy every year, if we can create a few percent more than we destroy every year, and we do a lot of destruction, that few percent compounded over centuries is civilization. And so I think that there is a net positive to social media, and that we will generally going to pay that price or constantly shift these expressions around so they become more convivial, become less harmful. But I think that dependency is good and bad. I think that the ubiquity is good and bad. I think that the transparency is good and bad. And by the way, transparency and opacity are really on a slider, and that slider also moves personalization and customization. So at maximum transparency, that's how you have something totally personalized. Okay? In other words, if I want somebody to treat me as an individual, not as a number, not as a generic thing, completely as an individual, I have to reveal myself to them. They have to know me. So if I want an organization, a company, a government, or even a person to truly treat me as an individual, I have to be transparent to them. If, on the other hand, I don't like transparency, and I can move that slider all the way to become more private, that means that the only way I'm going to be treated is as a generic number. And so I think we should always have that option. But what we're finding out is that most people are generally pushing the slider to the transparent, customized world. They're always pushing it further than we thought people would, because by pushing it to more transparent, they become seen more as an individual.
But I don't think that's a drive, no? It's not. I mean, it's a side effect of what companies like Facebook and.
No, I think when we have options, what we find out is if you give people the option.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way I like to say it is vanity trumps privacy.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah.
That's what it is.
Well, it's also about communication, and if you want to communicate, you have to open yourself.
That's what I'm saying. If you're going to communicate as an individual, you have to open yourself. And so generally, what we're finding is vanity trumps privacy. Almost every chance that we give people to have that decision, they'll take vanity over privacy.
Can I ask you a different question? I read about singularity. And that's, well, the point you can't imagine what's happening next, going around the corner. And I was reading in the newspaper this weekend about DNA sequencers that can read your DNA in 15 minutes. And somewhere I read you don't believe in singularity the way, well, the classic notion of it, like it's a black hole, Kurzweil style.
Yeah.
Why not? And what means singularity for you then?
Well, actually, the idea of it being closer to a black hole is something that I do endorse. But that's not the strong, that's the weak version of the singularity. The strong version of the singularity, which Ray Kurzweil promotes, is that we will invent an artificial intelligence that's smarter than us, whatever that means, and that artificial intelligence will then create an artificial intelligence smarter than itself, and so on, and that each time it does that, it's doing it faster, so that from our perspective, what it looks like, as soon as we make AI, suddenly, bing, we have super AI God, and that AI will then cure all our problems, including immortality, giving us immortality. And so if we live long enough to the first AI being invented, almost within instantly, this exponential curve, which goes vertical, almost instantly, we live forever. And also, Ray is hoping to resurrect his father. It gives you a resurrection, not just immortality for existing, but you get immortality for all who have lived before you. I thought that was like, no, that's not going to happen in 2039.
It gives me a headache.
Yeah. So that's the strong version. The weak version is simply that things accelerate to a point that becomes faster and faster, that we can't see what's going to happen next. And I have a modification of that, and that's called the, I see the singularity not as so much exponential growth, which I think the problem with that is that we've been on exponential growth, according to Ray, forever. So the singularity is always going to be near. When you're on an exponential curve, the singularity is always near, but you never reach it. That's the whole paradox of it. So, but I do think that there is a type of singularity that we can't see beyond that happens because of a change in levels. Because basically things emerge on a new level. And I actually argue that we've been, as humans, we've been through one singularity already, and that's language. So the people, humanoids before language simply could not see what a world of language was like. Okay? And yet when we were going through this singularity of language, there was never any point when someone said, "Oh my gosh, do you realize what we're doing? We're in a singularity. We're talking. This is amazing that we're actually talking right now." I think it's only seen in retrospect. We can turn around and look and say, "Yeah, we went through something." And I think what we're going through right now is actually a singularity where, sure, the speed is a part of it, but also part of it is the fact that we are making a global something. We are making some kind of global organism of tying all this stuff together, and there's things happening at kind of the global level that we are basically unable to perceive or really appreciate or to tune into because it's happening at such a large scale that it becomes very hard for us to understand. In addition to the fact that there is sort of, things speeding up. So I think the idea that, yes, we can't see, we can't really even imagine what it's going to be like 1,000 years from now or 500 years from now or maybe even 100 years from now. I think that there may be something to that. But I don't buy this idea that as soon as we make an artificial intelligence, it's just going to, we're going to have the rapture. We're going to reach heaven. That's what I argue against.
Now, you have also been involved in the Quantified Self movement for quite a couple of years now, and psychologists have shown that logging or quantifying aspects of your life can have a considerable impact. So I was wondering, how has it influenced you so far, and what kinds of things have you been logging and quantifying?
Right. So I began the Quantified Self not as a self-tracker myself, but only interested in the cultural ramifications and the movements. So, but I do track one thing. Actually, I just I don't have it, but I have the Fitbit, and the Fitbit tracks activity, steps. It's like a really smart pedometer that can also be used for sleeping and your movement at night. And I think there's a couple interesting things about that. It's because you're tracking something all the time. It turns out that when you're tracking something all the time, you gazillion data points, that there often it's the questions you didn't think to ask in the beginning that become more important. So while this activity monitor can show me what it's being sold for is how many steps, make sure you do your 10,000 steps in a day, which was sort of based on the Amish farmer. Somebody figured out the Amish farmers take 10,000 steps on day just in their daily routine, and that they were very healthy, and therefore 10,000 steps was a goal that you wanted to take. But it turns out that just the number of steps was sort of not enough, because those steps would often be segregated into a very small period of time in the day, and the rest of the day I'm sort of sitting here in front of the computer, and sitting is turning out to be really bad for your health. So what the Fitbit can show you is that distribution of when you're active, how far the activity is spread out in the day, and it becomes kind of like, though maybe if you really concentrated and paid a lot of attention to yourself, you might figure that out, but it's really hard. And so with the self-tracking, it's a way, it's a kind of a mirror or window into your own self that for some reason we have a very difficult time of assessing. People are always surprised what the data says. If you ask me, how much time would I spend sitting down? I just wouldn't have guessed as much that I do. Or it's the same thing about sleep activity or anything else. That when you actually start to quantify it over time, you become self-aware. And that's just for something that I could track my activity even without this thing. But what we're seeing, again, that's what I'm tracking. But the other kinds of things that we see at our meetings and the things that people are tracking are like a inserted continuous glucose monitor in their belly that gives them basically their kind of insulin and glucose readings all the time, day and night. This is like revelatory for medicine, because suddenly you can see the effect of everything. And when you start to have more than one thing that you're tracking, you begin to see these interactions, which is really the holy grail in medicine. And so there's several reasons to even do that. Why would you put a 24-hour glucose monitoring? Well, first of all, it's because it's like pioneers. People don't know. It's like, well, what happens? What do I know? Or some people are starting off with not feeling well, but it turns out that even doing it when you're well has a tremendous advantage for two reasons. One is because we don't even know what normal is. We really don't know what normal is. Normal, for most medical anything, is just some statistical average out of the whole population that really almost has nothing to do with you. So what the main thing is to find out what your normal is. And the second thing is that this also forms a baseline for if you should get sick later on. You suddenly have something to know, well, here's what it is when I was feeling well. Here's what it has been for the last 3 or 4 years. And so this ability is really, really, really fundamental. And where it will come out is, where we're seeing it come out, is when you take that with genetic sequencing, is you can begin to really make drugs, procedures that are really tailored to you. Because it turns out that even the best-selling drugs in the world, like Lipor, the cholesterol drugs and stuff, they really only work for 2% of the population. They're really only effective in terms of saving lives for 2% of the population. But the problem is we don't know what 2%. So they're administered to anybody who has high cholesterol levels, even though a lot of those people with high cholesterol levels won't die from it. It will bring them down, but we don't. But only 2 or 3% of those would have died because of that. And so we're kind of treating in a really very brutal, inefficient, industrial way, when what we really want to have is use the self-tracking abilities combined with genetic sequencing of individuals to really be able to say, okay, your genes and everything you're set up, you'll benefit from this. You need to take this at this dosage. And that's the health benefits of tracking. There's productivity reasons, and that's another aspect, and there are other reasons. So I think this is a very powerful thing based on the fact that it will become easy and cheap to do. It's just people, we're tracking all the ways that we do this. Having it wireless is tremendously important. Smaller, wearable. There was a guy just at the QS meeting last week. He had these little smart buttons on his shirt that could determine his posture, how he was sitting, how he was moving his body, and telling all kinds of things from this shirt that he made. It's really changing very, very fast. And the answer, well, I'm only tracking a few things. If you can imagine something being tracked, somebody somewhere is tracking it right now.
It's like in psychology, you have this mindfulness stream nowadays. I think it's not a coincidence that it's in the same period of time that we're living. It's almost like a bird's eye view of yourself.
Yes, it is. It is. We in our little website we say it's a way of knowing yourself with numbers. There are other ways to know yourself. You can do Zen meditation, and there's lots of spiritual traditions as a way of knowing yourself, and they're all valid. But we're saying here's another way to know yourself through numbers.
Yeah, but it's a very scientific approach to yourself. Just as mindfulness is almost very, like this is your reaction in the brain, so this is how you can understand it. How do you explain that this is happening now, at this point in time?
I actually think that it's primarily because the tools allow us to do it. I think I'm a believer in the tools shaping science and tools shaping our view, and I think it's because we can now finally do this. That if these tools had been available 100 years ago, people would have been doing it then, and that it's only because it's so cheap and so easy to do. Now, the downside of this, not the downside, but the challenge of this is going to be that we're going to be very fast producing so much data. I mean, just exabytes of data that the real challenge is processing and extracting out meaning and pattern from it. And if you actually, what I would counsel anybody is like, the growth industries in the future, data everything. It's like people who can have ideas about how to deal with this data, the facility for dealing with data, that's huge, because it's just not, of course, the quantified self, it's everything else, all these other sensors. But we're just going to be producing this ocean of data, and getting meaningful patterns out of that, and then being able to do something with it, that's going to be a real challenge. Just making the sensors is going to be the easy part. Even the non-invasive sensors, we will do that. It's really unclear how we do this without maybe some kind of artificial intelligence or something.
The second edition of the Technion. What new insights, questions, or what did you learn since publishing the book?
Yeah. With
all these Hangouts.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think even by the time I finished the book, and certainly the Hangouts have reinforced this to me, is that the area of the book where there's a hole, where I need to spend more effort to kind of and to develop more, is in this issue of the characteristics of a convivial technology, the features and the means by which we would tease out the most convivial form of the most convivial expression of technology. So that's sort of what people want to know. That's sort of what is most useful to us, and that part of the book is not developed very much. That's what would be the next logical step, and that's certainly what comes up in a lot of these Hangouts is, give me real practical heuristics, real practical principles for evaluating a technology, and to put it into this framework. And so I think that would be a logical thing. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that, or I want to do that, but that's certainly the message that I get from these Hangouts.
So your book was conceived on your blog already and on your website as a blog, and your next book you've been saying will be an e-book only.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So how do you think the fact that it's going to be digital only is going to affect it?
I don't know. I don't know. It's. I think the problem is even bigger than whether it's on paper or ebook. The problem really is that in this generation, people just aren't reading books. That really, if I really want to reach the maximum number of people, particularly young people, I shouldn't be making a book at all. I should be doing YouTube videos. More people will see my TED videos than will ever read my books. And so, so when I say ebook, I'm using that as a stand-in for something that's electronic, because I'm not really sure right now that the format of just this long argument written in text is really the ideal way to reach people. And you know, and I just don't want to be. I mean, I actually find, you know, we're talking about social media and these distractions. These are real. Everybody is having trouble reading books, finishing a book, and so I'm not really interested in sort of fighting just writing books for the sake of writing books. There's still a power in them. There's still some kind of cultural confirmation, but nonetheless, I think to really reach people, I think other media are doing it more effectively, and so what I'm thinking about is alternative forms that could convey complicated, deep ideas, not just in book form. So that's what I mean by ebook. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be capable of that. I mean, that's the thing about this is that this is you know, there are some good examples of it, but it's very hard to do because you know, a book has been evolved for thousands of years, and so the form of it is very refined. You kind of know what it is. All those problems have been solved. The form of this online alternative has not been solved, and there's lots of experiments, and most of them don't work. And so it's very kind of higher risk in doing this because you're not likely to get the right form that will be effective.
But you yourself said in the beginning that everything has its niche, and your niche is too small?
It may be. It may be too small. But on the other hand, I've written all my books with a future audience in mind. In other words, Out of Control was not. I mean, I hope as many people at the time would read it. But actually, in fact, I was trying to write it kind of for a longer term, and it was completely ignored when it first came out in 1994. I mean, it just went over. It was more like California craziness. And so, but now it's actually selling better than it has ever sold, because people kind of understand. It's sort of what I was trying to say makes more sense now. And I think even the new economy, the same thing. When it came out, people were thinking .com craziness. And I'm saying, no, this has nothing to do with .com craziness. The new rules are about this intangible networked economy, which is not going away.
So books won't disappear. I mean, no technology ever disappears. That's
right. There will always be books. And so in that sense, if I was to take the long-term view, I'd say, I mean, if I would say what form would be useful 100 years from now, is probably a book.
Well, there you go.
And so if I really wanted to shift my audience and say I don't really care about people reading it now, but just 100 years, yes, I would just write a book.
So then this book, What Technology Wants, might also have its peak in 10, 15 years.
I believe so. I'm hoping that.
You're ahead of your time.
That's actually how I was writing it. I was saying, you know, I know that people really don't really care about this right now, but I believe in 50 years or so, people will really need to have some kind of theory. And maybe my theory is not the correct theory, but at least I'm proposing a theory. So it'll maybe it becomes the Lamarck. There's Lamarck, and I become the Lamarck of the technology. That's fine. That's fine, but at least, you know, I was there.
And you are imaginative.
Yeah. It's maybe a bit of off topic, but the book is also for me also very much about time and experiencing time. And can you relate it to your to the Long Now Foundation?
Yeah.
About well, it's I don't know whether everybody knows what it is, but it's well, it's basic.
Yeah.
Well, can you explain it?
So the Long Now Foundation was set up maybe 15 years ago. Stuart Brand, Danny Hillis, Brian Eno, and a few others serve as the core members. And the principle of the Long Now is a term Brian Eno, the rock star, invented to describe a counterforce to the short now. The short now is what most people are living in, which is they have a perspective of the last 5 minutes and the next 5 minutes. It's like they're right here. There's no idea of the long past or the long future. And the long now is to suggest that there is an expansion of this, that we become aware of time, of civilization scale time, both in the past and the future. And so the idea of Long Now Foundation was to encourage long-term thinking, okay, and generational projects. We weren't saying which generation of projects or what thinking. We're just saying try and take a generational view of what you're doing. And as an emblem of that, as a symbol of that, we did many projects, and one of the projects is the 10,000-year clock. And this is a clock that is now being built inside a mountain in West Texas. And this clock is a huge 500 feet long, 500 feet tall clock that you can walk inside of. That's actually a slow computer. It's actually a mechanical digital clock. It actually calculates the time. It moves very slowly, and it will tick for 10,000 years. And every year is a tick, and every 100 years is a talk, and every 1,000 years something happens. Like a cuckoo comes out. And and there was a prototype of a very small prototype version that we did to ring in the year 2000. That clock is standing in the London Science Museum. There is other parts of the clock which are in Nathan Myhrvold's house, but this first version of the clock is being built in the mountain. We hope to build another version of it on the mall in Washington, D.C. And the purpose of the clock is just to remind people that it's like, if this clock is ticking for 10,000 years, what can we measure? If that's doing all by itself for 10,000 years, which is, I mean, it's not quite by itself, but if this is going for 10,000 years, then what should we be doing? How can we take that kind of long-term view of the world? So the clock is viewing us in a certain sense. What will it see over the long term? And so it's sort of like to make this sort of icon. And we will be encouraging people to take pilgrimages to this clock, because in fact, while the clock on its own, through a very ingenious system, can maintain the time, it won't display the time, which is the big thing, unless humans attend to it. So the humans come and you wind it to display the current time. It shows the time of the last person to visit. Even though internally it's knowing the time, it just doesn't tell you it unless you ask for it by winding the big interface of the clock. And so it's a huge it's an overnight hike into this mountain, and it'll be a pilgrimage, very difficult to get to in the desert of West Texas, and that is what we hope this will do, is remind people about long-term thinking.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Do you feel a connection to all these various slow movements nowadays? You
No.
like slow food and slow this and slow that. Doesn't
Not personally. um,
does it stem from the same? Maybe, I don't know.
I'm not sure slow. I'm not sure it is about time. Generally, I feel, the slow food, I feel it's much more about, I haven't detected people kind of, eating slower. I haven't seen
No, it's about growing crops. And
yeah, right. So I'm not sure it has much to do with that time. But, I understand that part. I think it's true, but, you have to remember that I kind of went through this once already in the hippie eras, 60s.
So they're all a bunch of hippies.
We've been there. I'm not sure it's sustainable. I do honor it as alternative, as another option, and I think that's really fantastic. I think that it's just part of this thing of you should have the option for organic everything, and you should have the option for locally grown. That's really great. But I see all those as part of a larger system. I don't see industrialized food production going away. It's just simply can't go away. But we can certainly have these other options.
Okay. I see it's almost 6 o'clock. I don't know if we have time for one more.
Yeah, let's do one more question because I was a
Okay.
little late. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. One part of the book, the final part, is I think for us as a very secular Dutch people quite an interesting twist, because you are a religious person. Can you maybe explain again how you match your ideas about the technium to your religion?
Yeah. Well, I think this is kind of a big question to do in the last minute, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of the most succinct way to do this. I would say that the more I looked at the origins of the technium and the cosmic aspect of it, I think it's clear if anybody does it, the more you realize sort of how amazing the system is and how little we know. If here's the current scientific orthodoxy that 98% of the matter in the universe is dark matter. What does dark matter mean? It means that we have no idea. That's what it means. And 98% of the energy is dark energy. It basically means that we have no idea of what this is. So I think when I look at the technium, I do see it as an extension of the same force that runs through evolution and life. And I don't really grapple with what the origins are of it, because I think this is so far beyond our scientific ability right now to even know. But I am been convinced that there is a continuum with the technium and life and the origins of the cosmic diversity and stuff, and it really does form a long continuous thread. And so, to the extent that if that system has what I'm saying in the book is if that system has a creator, a beginning, that this system is a reflection of the order at the beginning. The scientific orthodoxy right now is that the universe is running down out of order. That's entropy. It's running down. But what that means is at the very beginning, at the very tiny femtosecond beginning of the universe, there was a lot of order. Nobody has any idea where that order comes from. So I assign, I call that something, that beginning, God. And I say that this while the universe is running down, there's another aspect of it where it's running up. It's making more and more order out of the small bit of order. The order is sort of compressing. The rest of the universe is becoming orderless, and then there's a small convergence of order and things becoming more ordered. I say that's a reflection of the beginning. And so That's what that means. This is the kind of the language that I'm using. So I think that to the extent that if anybody has any kind of religious feelings and they go to the redwoods and they see the cathedral of the trees and they feel some kind of awe to this incredible thing, I'm saying that we can find that same kind of awe in the technium. That will make our technology so complicated, and so beyond our understanding, and so dense with history and evolution, that eventually we'll come to the technium and we'll see the same kind of awe that we see in nature. And that's my argument. It's really very simple, saying that there is that the technological stuff we make is an extension of the life. And if you can see any kind of divine in life, you'll see it eventually in the technium.
Okay, well, very nicely said. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for your questions. It was a joy to be here. I hope you guys got something useful for whatever you want, and I'll be happy to answer questions by email if that's helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
And you will send us the clip or link to the clip later, right? Or the
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, wonderful.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.